Well, let's go to the news of the day here. If you were to ask Carrie Prodzic to describe the current state of domestic violence in our province in a word, she would say epidemic. Carrie's executive director of Parkland Crisis Centre and Women's Shelter in Dauphin. Her shelter is a 51-minute drive from McCreary, and that is where, as you likely know, 3 people were killed in what RCMP call a horrific act of intimate partner violence. But it's the only domestic violence shelter in the area. In an update yesterday, RCMP said victims were related to the suspect's former partner and that she had a protection order against him. Carrie says it's the news that the community is coming to grips with now, and she shared more with CBC's Chidi Akuma.
When we became aware of the news in our community, it, of course, impacted our community and surrounding communities. It's something people never want to hear. However, it is a reality, and we have to stand up and be vigilant and just be aware that it is happening. It is very prevalent in our communities. I think we need to take domestic violence a lot more seriously. I think there's been a stigma attached to it for so many years. It is very prevalent. It is out there. We need to talk about it. We need to take action. I think government needs to stand up, and we need to address this.
That's Carrie Prodzic, Executive Director of the Parkland Crisis Centre and Women's Shelter in Dauphin. And speaking of government, the Premier's live on our show after 8 o'clock. We will ask him about how we can do better. My next guest, though, joining us live now via Zoom is Sungai Movingi Van Landegem. She's with the Manitoba Association for Women's Shelters. Good morning.
Morning, Marcy. Thank you for speaking with me this morning.
Thank you for being with us. I mean, we have been using the word epidemic when it comes to domestic violence across the country and in this province for some time now. What's your reaction, and how are you doing with what happened in the aftermath now of McCreary?
Just heartbroken and disheartened. I think a lot of families and communities are experiencing this, especially the survivor and her family. My heart goes out to them. No words can ever show the gravity of what she and her family are going through and what that community is experiencing. And unfortunately, intimate partner violence and family violence continue to rise. And along with this increase, we're also seeing an escalation in the levels of violence.
We know now that the victims, as I mentioned, were parents and the brother of the suspect's former common law partner. We also know court documents show she was granted a protection order last year. What is your thought on that and how effective protection orders are in the real world?
Protection orders are complex. A protection order is a tool for the legal system, but we're finding it's not effective for people fleeing violence. It is a piece of paper that unfortunately does not always stop violence because it's only as good if enforced. And law enforcement can't always enforce them for various reasons, including limited resources, as both the legal and justice systems are also stretched thin. There is also jurisdictional limitations depending on the community. I think there also needs to be an understanding that protection orders may actually worsen situations, as abusers may not want to lose the control over their victims, so they escalate the level of violence. The challenge then becomes, how do you enforce these protection orders with limited resources? There's limitations in safe spaces and shelters and community resource centers, safe and affordable housing, accessible transportation, especially in rural and remote communities, mental health and substance use supports, and the list goes on and on. I mean, we've had women tell us that they plan to go into hiding when the protection order is issued, as they know there will be backlash. So these need to be taken a lot more seriously in the enforcement behind it if these are the only tools being used.
You've raised a lot of concerns there. Where would you start? One of the things that stood out for me from what you just said, Sungai, was not enough safe spaces if people are to look for somewhere to go. And it's just in this case, when we said that, the nearest shelter was a 51-minute away drive. I'm imagining that especially in rural areas that might, if I'm extrapolating here, mean safe spaces where people are.
Yes, absolutely. Because the resources are so far spread out, it can be very challenging for victims or survivors to be able to find somewhere to go. as you mentioned, Parkland is 51-minute drive. But in addition to Parkland being far away, and this is not just in reference to Parkland, but many rural communities, there's also lack of accessible transportation. Some communities only have like one bus a week.
How do we
Many are fly in and fly out, so it really limits safe places that families can go to.
Sorry to interrupt you there. I wanted to ask you, how can we make sure the laws are better enacted?
I think that there needs to be better education, both in the legal system and justice system, as well as like in the community. I think being able to look at these situations and taking them even more seriously, that this, there's a heavy gravity in these situations, to make sure that there's other tools that are being implemented to make sure that families and survivors are kept safe. Again, a protection order is only a piece of paper, but without resources to enforce that piece of paper or that law, that legislation, there really isn't any reduction or any impact. So I think the first place to start is like both the education piece, as well as ensuring that there's other ways to enforce any laws or protection orders.
The Premier is going to be sitting in our studio live after 8 o'clock. Obviously, we're talking about the case out of McCreary, but Manitobans are going to remember earlier this year the deaths of those 5 people, 4 children included in that in Carmen in February. It was also the result of intimate partner violence. Manitoba, in fact, has the second highest rate of intimate partner violence all across Canada. What do you need from this provincial government?
I think that there needs to be more education in the community. It isn't just for one sector to be working towards ending intimate partner violence. It has to be across the board. That means collaborations between the justice system, shelter systems, mental health systems, affordable housing. All of those different areas need to be working together. Working in silos is not going to solve the challenges and the issues that are coming up. We definitely do appreciate and recognize the efforts that the government is making in looking for solutions that are community driven, and welcome any support that they provide in helping diverse communities experiencing intimate partner violence. But there also needs to be a way to remove that stigma, because it is still unfortunately prevalent in community and in some of the systems. For instance, the process to get a protection order is very long and complicated. We have protection order designates in our shelters and many of the organizations working in the sector, but even then the process is so long and complicated, many women actually just give up.
Got it.
And then there's the thought, well, even if I get it, if it's not going to do anything, why bother?
So coordination, communication, funding for shelters, lots of work to do, lots of things to ask the Premier about. Thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Marcy.
That's Sungay Movingi Van Landegem, who's the co-provincial coordinator of the Manitoba Association for Women's Shelters. I need to make a small correction here. I mentioned that case in Carmen, and it was 3 children, 1 teen, an adult. 3 children, 1 teen, and 1 adult who were killed there in that case. That was the total of 5 people. I believe I said 4 children. It is 2 minutes now to 8.